In court, my guardian claimed $80,000 for each year I sheltered you. The judge let her speak, then passed a file across and said, "Interesting. These records prove you took over $200,000 to raise him." She turned ghostly as the whole courtroom exploded. Can you even imagine being told you owe someone tens of thousands of dollars for the sheer privilege of being raised, only to discover they've been secretly profiting off your entire life? Because that's exactly what happened to me, and the fight to reclaim my past nearly broke me. My name is Caleb, and the first crack in my world appeared when I was just 17. Not in our house, but in the woman who was supposed to be keeping it all together, my Aunt Lorraine. For as long as I could remember, she was the absolute center of every decision in my life. She wasn't my biological mom. My real mom passed when I was 5, but the court handed her custody, and that was that. Growing up under her roof felt like living under glass. You could see freedom on the other side, but you weren't allowed to touch it. She reminded me almost daily, with a tone that scraped like sandpaper, that she took me in when no one else would. She said it like a favor she could revoke at any moment, as if she kept me around purely out of charity. And for a long time, I believed her. I truly thought I owed her something. The first real sign that something was seriously wrong came when I was 14. I just wanted to join the school baseball team. It wasn't anything crazy, just a second-hand gear sale, cheap fees. But when I asked, she scoffed. "Who's paying for that, Caleb? You think money grows on trees? Be grateful you have a roof over your head." I didn't push back. I just nodded, went back to my room, and stared at that team sign-up sheet until the deadline passed. That became the pattern. Anything extra, field trips, sports, even school dances, was met with a lecture about her immense sacrifices. Do you know what it costs to feed you? To clothe you? You should be thanking me every single day. It got to the point where I did start thanking her, just to avoid the icy, crushing silence that followed if I didn't. But as I got older, little things stopped adding up. We weren't wealthy, sure, but we weren't struggling either. She always had a new phone, got her hair done every other month, and had season tickets to her favorite basketball team. Then, one day, she left some mail on the counter. I noticed a letter from Social Security with my name on it. I didn't think much of it then, but the number next to benefits stuck in my head. $1,500 per month. $1,500. Fast forward to my senior year, and things really started heating up. I got accepted into a state university and even scored a small scholarship. Not enough to cover everything, but enough to make it possible. I came home waving that acceptance letter like a flag, expecting maybe, just maybe, a rare proud smile. Instead, she frowned. "You're not seriously thinking about leaving, are you? Who's going to help me with bills if you run off to college?" That was the first time I actually felt anger instead of guilt. I told her I could get a part-time job and cover my own expenses, but she shut that down immediately. "No, Caleb. You're not taking some minimum wage job that will make this house look bad. You live here. You follow my rules. End of discussion." Except it wasn't the end. Not for me. Something about the way she said my house lit a fuse I didn't even know I had. I started quietly keeping records. Receipts for the chores she paid me nothing for. Screenshots of those Social Security letters when I found them again. Even notes about the times she screamed at me over money while wearing brand new jewelry. The breaking point came 3 months later, right after graduation. We were sitting at the kitchen table when she slid a piece of paper across to me. An itemized list of everything she claimed she'd spent raising me since I was 5. Food, shelter, clothes, school supplies, down to the dollar. The grand total? Just over $80,000. "You're an adult now," she said, folding her arms, a chilling smirk playing on her lips. "It's time you pay me back. I expect you to start with at least $500 a month once you get that job." I stared at the list for what felt like an hour. Every number was inflated. $400 a month for groceries for one teenager? $300 for wear and tear on the house? And the sheer gall of charging me back rent for a room that was barely bigger than a closet. Something snapped inside me. I didn't say much that day, just nodded and told her I needed time to think. But that night, sitting on my bed with her insane invoice in my lap, I made a decision. I wasn't going to keep letting her rewrite my entire childhood into a debt I owed. And for the first time in my life, I was going to fight back. What I didn't know then was just how far this fight would go. All the way to a courtroom, with a judge staring over his glasses and Lorraine demanding tens of thousands of dollars from me like she was some landlord I'd been cheating for years. But when that day came, I would be ready. More ready than she could have ever imagined. I didn't sleep much that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation we'd ever had about money. The next morning, Lorraine was acting like nothing had happened, whistling while making coffee, humming along to the radio. It made my skin crawl. She had just told me I owed her 80 grand, and she was cheerful about it, almost smug. Over the next few weeks, the tension between us got thicker than summer heat. I started noticing just how often she brought up money, and not just with me. She complained to her friends on the phone about how expensive kids are, told neighbors she'd given up her whole life to raise me. I overheard her telling one woman that she should have been compensated for her time years ago. I had to bite my tongue to keep from blurting out that she was compensated every single month since I was 5. Then came the job interviews. I landed one at a local hardware store. Not glamorous, but decent pay and flexible hours. I was thrilled. But when I told Lorraine, she acted like I'd announced I joined a gang. A hardware store? Caleb, do you know how that makes us look? I told you, I don't want you wasting your time with dead-end jobs. You should be at home helping me around here until we figure out your repayment plan. That was her new favorite phrase, repayment plan. She'd bring it up at random moments, like when we were eating dinner or watching TV. You know, if you'd start paying me back now, we could get ahead of things, or you better not be planning on blowing that first paycheck on games and junk food. You owe me. I tried reasoning with her, explaining that I needed to save for tuition, books, transportation, but she wouldn't hear it. You wouldn't even be going to college if it wasn't for me. You're lucky I kept you fed and alive this long. You'll pay me first. Everything else comes second. It was around that time that I started piecing together the financial picture more seriously. I went digging through old files in the cabinet when she was out one afternoon and found years of Social Security payment letters, all addressed to her, but with my name listed as the beneficiary. The math made my stomach turn. From the time I was 5 until I turned 18, she had collected well over $200,000 in benefits. And here she was, acting like she'd been emptying her personal savings account for me. The next time she brought up the debt, I couldn't stop myself. You've already been paid to raise me, Lorraine. The government gave you money every month. You didn't do this out of charity. She froze, then narrowed her eyes. Excuse me. I stood my ground. I've seen the letters. The benefits. Over 200 grand. Lorraine, you've been cashing those checks since Mom died. So don't act like I've been freeloading. Her face went red. You little snoop. How dare you go through my things? That money was barely enough to keep the lights on. That's not what it looked like when you bought those season tickets. I shot back before I could stop myself. That was the first time she ever slapped me. Not hard enough to leave a bruise, but enough to send me reeling. She didn't even apologize, just pointed toward my room and said, "Go before I say something I regret." After that, the house turned into a Cold War zone. She barely spoke to me unless it was to remind me of what I owed. And when she did talk, it was louder, meaner, like she wanted the whole neighborhood to hear how ungrateful I was. She even started telling extended family about my debt. At my cousin's birthday party, she loudly announced that I was finally going to start paying my way now that I was an adult. Everyone nodded sympathetically, like she was some saint who had carried me on her back all these years. No one asked me for my side of the story. I tried to keep my head down, but the final straw came a month later when she intercepted my first paycheck. I came home from work to find it sitting on the kitchen table opened. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight. "Calculating your first payment," she said, scribbling on a notepad. "You made $420 after taxes. You can give me $300. You'll keep the rest for gas or whatever." I snatched the check off the table before I even realized what I was doing. "That's my money. That's my house," she shot back, standing up. "And don't you forget it. You start paying me now or I'll take you to court. You're legally an adult." I can see for back support. I almost laughed, partly out of disbelief, partly because I realized she was dead serious. She would drag me to court over this, and she thought she'd win. That night, I packed a bag and left. Not forever, just enough to cool off. I stayed with my friend Mason for a few days, sleeping on his couch and working my shifts at the store. Lorraine blew up my phone with texts, alternating between rage and guilt trips. "You've embarrassed me. You're stealing from me. You better come back before I make this official." That last message made something in me click. I went to legal aid the next day and asked what would happen if a guardian tried to sue for back expenses. The woman I spoke to raised an eyebrow and said, "Not much. Especially if you can prove she's already been compensated." So, I started gathering everything. The Social Security letters, bank records, screenshots of texts where she admitted she was expecting me to pay her back. Mason's mom even wrote a statement about overhearing her yelling at me about debt. By the time Lorraine finally filed a claim demanding $80,000 for room, board, and caregiving services, I was ready. The hearing date was set for mid-September. On the morning of court, I saw her in the hallway, dressed like she was attending a funeral, clutching a folder thick with papers. She gave me a look that said she was confident she'd finally put me in my place. I sat down, my own folder in my lap, heart pounding, but strangely calm. This was going to be the day everything came out. I wasn't going down quietly. And when the judge walked in and asked Lorraine to present her case, she stood tall, cleared her throat, and began listing every single expense she claimed I owed her. Line by line, year by year, while the courtroom listened in silence. I didn't even flinch, because I knew what was coming next. Lorraine's voice echoed through the courtroom, each word sharp and deliberate, as if she had been rehearsing for months. $400 per month for food, $300 for shelter, $200 for utilities, clothing, medical bills, transportation costs. All of it added up to $80,000 over the years. I've kept him housed and fed when no one else would. I just want what's fair. She even sniffled at the end, clutching the folder dramatically like she was some long-suffering martyr. A few people sitting behind us murmured in sympathy, which made my jaw clench. I could almost hear the same old narrative forming in their heads. Poor Lorraine, stuck raising her dead sister's kid, and now the ungrateful brat won't even pay her back. But then she did something that made my stomach flip. She turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, I also want to be reimbursed for damages he caused to my property during his teenage years. Broken dishes, scratches on the floor, even a dent in the car door he caused when he slammed it too hard." That was the moment I felt the last thread snap. She wasn't just trying to drain my bank account. She was rewriting my entire childhood as a series of debts and punishments, painting me as some reckless delinquent who had left her financially ruined. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was on fire. I'd never once broken a dish on purpose, and that dent in the car door? She caused it herself when she backed into the mailbox. I just happened to be standing there when it happened. The judge nodded politely as she handed over her itemized list, but I caught the faintest twitch of his eyebrow. He'd seen these kinds of caregiver reimbursement cases before, I was sure of it, and he knew they were rarely as simple as they sounded. When it was my turn, I stood, my palms damp, but my spine straight. I handed the judge my own folder, the one I'd been building for months. "Your Honor, I have documentation that shows Ms. Bennett has been receiving monthly survivor's benefits on my behalf since I was 5 years old. The total amount collected exceeds $200,000. Lorraine's head whipped toward me so fast I thought she might hurt herself. "That money was mine," she hissed under her breath, but loud enough that the clerk raised an eyebrow. I ignored her and kept talking. "I also have records showing that she opened a separate savings account in her name only, where most of those funds were deposited. In addition, I have receipts that show significant spending on personal luxuries, vacations, season tickets, jewelry, during the time she claimed she was struggling to provide for me." The room went silent, except for the faint rustle of papers as the judge flipped through the file. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't the kid in the corner being scolded. I was the one holding the truth. Lorraine tried to recover. "Your Honor, those benefits were barely enough to cover the basics. And he's lying about the savings account." I have the bank statements, I said calmly, cutting her off. They're in the file, pages 5 through 9. The judge held up a hand. Miss Bennett, you'll have a chance to respond. For now, let me review what's been presented. While he read, Lorraine leaned toward me and whispered, You're going to regret this. Do you have any idea what you're doing? I didn't even look at her. Yeah, I said quietly. For once, I do. It should have ended there. The evidence was solid. The truth was in black and white. But Lorraine wasn't done. Not even close. As soon as the judge looked up, she launched into a fresh tirade. You don't understand, Your Honor. He's been disrespectful since the day he turned 13. He refuses to help around the house. He talks back. He ran away for days at a time. I had to cancel trips because of him. I lost friends because of him. He's been nothing but a burden, and now he's trying to make me look like a thief. Her voice cracked, and for a split second, I saw something almost unhinged in her expression. This wasn't just about money anymore. She wanted to punish me, to humiliate me in front of everyone, to prove that I was still the scared kid she could control. The betrayal hit me harder than I expected. Some small part of me had still been holding on to the hope that deep down she cared about me, that this was just about financial stress, that once things were laid out clearly, we could go our separate ways without turning it into a war. But seeing her twist my entire life into some sob story about how much I had ruined hers, that crushed whatever was left of that hope. I sat back down slowly, my mind buzzing. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was exposing her. Every lie, every manipulation, every fake story she had told about being my savior. The judge finally set the papers down and looked over his glasses. Miss Bennett, he said, his tone noticeably cooler. It appears there are substantial financial records indicating you were compensated for Mr. Harris's care. I will need to review these carefully before making a determination. I will also remind you that this proceeding is to address your claim for reimbursement, not to litigate every grievance from the last decade. I suggest you stick to relevant facts moving forward. She sat down stiffly, her face flushed, and I could almost feel the heat of her glare. That was when I realized we weren't just in a legal battle. We were in a personal one. And she wasn't going to stop until she either got what she wanted or destroyed me trying. As we left the courtroom that day, she brushed past me and muttered, This isn't over, Caleb. Not by a long shot. I believed her, and I knew I'd need to be ready for whatever came next. Because Lorraine had just declared war. When we walked out of that courtroom, I felt strangely light, like I'd just dumped a boulder I'd been carrying my whole life. But that feeling didn't last long. Lorraine's warning wasn't just for show. She made good on her promise to make my life miserable, and she didn't waste a single day getting started. The very next morning, she showed up at my job. I was on my break, sitting in the back room eating a sandwich, when my manager popped his head in, looking uncomfortable. Caleb, there's a woman out front asking for you. Says she's your guardian. I stepped out and found Lorraine at the register, her voice pitched just loud enough for the customers to hear. There you are. You think you can hide from me here? You're living under my roof, eating my food, and you think you can disrespect me in court. I could feel my coworkers staring, my face burning hot. Lorraine, you need to leave, I said as calmly as I could manage. But she didn't. She kept going, ranting about ungrateful children and freeloaders, until my manager finally asked her to leave or he'd have to call security. She left in a huff, muttering that she'd be back. After that, she locked me out of the house for 2 full days. When I tried to get my things, she said, Not until you agree to sign a repayment agreement. I ended up crashing at Mason's again, wearing the same clothes to work for 3 shifts in a row because most of my stuff was still at her place. Then came the smear campaign. She called my grandparents, aunts, uncles, anyone who would listen, and told them I had sued her for money, not true, that I was trying to steal from the family, also not true, and that I was throwing away her years of sacrifice. Some relatives believed her immediately. I got a flood of texts calling me selfish, accusing me of abandoning the woman who raised me when no one else would. My grandmother even left me a voicemail saying, We didn't raise you to bite the hand that feeds you, Caleb. Make things right with Lorraine. That one stung the most. My grandmother had been my safe place when I was little, and now she was siding with Lorraine without even asking for my side of the story. Financially, things got tight fast. Lorraine cut off access to the joint account she had let me use for gas money, so I was scraping by on whatever I earned from the hardware store. I started skipping lunch to save a few dollars, walking to work to avoid filling up the tank too often. There were nights I sat on Mason's couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe Lorraine was right. Maybe I did owe her something. Maybe I should just agree to pay a little each month to make the fighting stop. But then I'd remember the slap, the open paycheck, the courtroom speech where she tried to paint me as a delinquent, and the guilt would turn to anger. One night, about 3 weeks after that first hearing, I drove by the house just to see if my window light was on. It wasn't, but I noticed something that made me grip the steering wheel tighter. There was a for sale sign planted in the yard. I parked down the street and just sat there for a long time, watching the house that had been my entire world growing up. Was she selling it to punish me? Or was this just another card she was playing? A way to scare me into backing down? Either way, the message was clear. She was willing to burn everything down if it meant making me pay. That was my lowest point. I felt like I was losing everything, my home, my family, my reputation. But instead of breaking me, it did something else. It forced me to start thinking like her. If she was going to fight dirty, then I needed to stop playing defense and start building a case that couldn't be ignored. So I got to work, quietly. After my shifts, I'd head to the library and comb through public records. I pulled property tax statements, benefit payout histories, and even found receipts from a vacation she took to Florida the same summer she told me we couldn't afford for me to go on a school trip. I also started documenting everything she was doing now, the harassment at work, the texts she sent threatening to make sure you never see a dime of inheritance. Mason helped me set up a folder on his computer where I stored screenshots, recordings, and notes. It wasn't just about proving she'd already been paid to raise me. It was about showing the court, and anyone else who needed to see it, the pattern of manipulation and financial abuse she had been running for years. The more I dug, the more I found. And with every piece of evidence I added to that folder, I felt a little stronger, a little more certain that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't just some ungrateful kid who owed her his life. Still, the pressure was brutal. There were days I showed up to work so exhausted from staying up late gathering documents that I almost nodded off in the break room. There were mornings I woke up with my phone buzzing, a fresh batch of angry voicemails from relatives who thought I was tearing the family apart. And there were nights I sat in Mason's driveway after everyone had gone to bed, gripping the steering wheel and just breathing, trying to convince myself that this was worth it, that the truth would matter in the end. By the time the next court date rolled around, I was a different person than I had been at that first hearing. Tired, sure, a little hollowed out, but sharper too. Lorraine thought she'd pushed me to my breaking point. What she didn't realize was that she'd actually pushed me into something much more dangerous, a version of myself who had nothing left to lose. And when I walked back into that courtroom, folder in hand, I wasn't just there to defend myself anymore. I was there to make sure the truth came out, no matter how ugly it got. By the time the next hearing was scheduled, I had transformed from the scared teenager Lorraine expected me to be into someone entirely different. It wasn't like my life suddenly became perfect. I was still technically homeless, still scraping by on hardware store paychecks. But something had shifted inside me. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building. It started small. One of my managers at work noticed how hard I'd been pushing through double shifts and asked me why I looked like I hadn't slept in a week. I hesitated, but ended up telling him a little. Not everything, just enough that he understood my situation wasn't normal. He didn't pry, but a few days later, he quietly offered me more hours and a raise. "You've earned it," he said. That single bump in pay was enough to get me out of crisis mode and into a planning mode. With a little more cash flow, I bought a cheap secondhand laptop. That one purchase changed everything. No more scribbling notes on paper or rushing to the library before it closed. I could organize my evidence digitally, cross-reference dates, create timelines of events. Mason helped me set up a spreadsheet that tracked every dollar Lorraine had received in survivor's benefits alongside the expenses she claimed in her so-called reimbursement list. Seeing it all laid out in black and white was almost therapeutic. The numbers told a story, and for once, it was mine. Around this time, I started getting unexpected support from people I didn't think would back me. Remember my grandmother, the one who had left me that voicemail calling me ungrateful? She showed up at the hardware store one afternoon holding a pie in one hand like some kind of peace offering. "Caleb," she said softly, "your aunt told us a lot of things." But then I got curious. I asked her for proof of all these expenses she says you owe her. She got defensive. "I've been talking to some family friends, and I think I might have been wrong about you." I didn't even know what to say. She came over to Mason's that evening, and for the first time in years, I told someone everything about the constant guilt trips, the paycheck she opened, the slap, the threats. My grandmother listened quietly, nodding slowly, her face growing more serious by the minute. When I finished, she let out a long breath and said, "I wish I had known sooner. Your mother trusted Lorraine to do right by you." She paused, then added in a voice that was almost a whisper, "She would be proud of you for standing up for yourself." That night, my grandmother handed me a folder of her own. Old letters from the Social Security office that she had kept by accident, copies of bank transfers she had made to Lorraine over the years to help with expenses. It was more evidence than I could have hoped for, and it strengthened my case tenfold. Even Mason's mom stepped in more actively, calling me into the kitchen one evening and telling me I could stay as long as I needed. "This isn't charity," she said firmly when I tried to argue. "This is giving you the breathing room to win this fight." With that support system behind me, I started walking taller. The panic attacks that used to hit me before court dates started to fade. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was on the offense. I even hired a lawyer, not a fancy one, but a young attorney from legal aid who was fiery enough to make Lorraine's head spin. She sat down with me for 2 hours, going over every document I had, asking pointed questions, taking notes. "You have a strong case," she said finally. "This isn't just about you not owing her money. This is about proving a pattern of financial exploitation. If we play this right, the judge isn't just going to dismiss her claim. He might reprimand her." Hearing that felt like someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. For so long, I had been the one cornered, the one apologizing, the one trying to keep the peace. But now the scales were tipping. Meanwhile, Lorraine was unraveling. She kept sending me texts, but they'd gone from angry to almost frantic. "Caleb, you don't have to do this. We can settle this between us. If you drop this, I'll forgive you." Forgive me? As if I was the one who had done something wrong. When I didn't respond, she switched tactics and started showing up at family gatherings with tearful speeches about how I was dragging her name through the mud. But this time, fewer people were buying it. My grandmother had started quietly talking to others about what was really happening, and I started getting cautious texts from cousins saying, "Hey, we heard about what's going on. If you need a statement about how she treated you, we'll write one." It was like someone flipped a switch. For the first time, I wasn't alone. On the day of the second hearing, I walked into the courthouse, not as some scared kid with a manila folder, but as someone who had come prepared for battle. My lawyer was beside me, a stack of exhibits under her arm. My grandmother was in the back row, sitting upright with her hands folded, ready to speak if needed. Lorraine, on the other hand, looked different, less polished, more desperate. Her folder was still thick with papers, but she kept glancing at me, her lips pressed in a tight line. As the session started, my lawyer stood up and laid out our case piece by piece, the survivor's benefits, the bank statements, the double-counted expenses. She spoke with calm precision, each fact landing like a stone in a pond. I watched Lorraine's face closely as the evidence piled up. At first, she looked irritated, then defensive, and finally worried. And that's when I knew the power dynamic had shifted. For years, she had been the one in control, the one deciding what story got told about my life. But now the story was out of her hands, and no amount of crocodile tears could change the math staring the judge in the face. And we weren't done yet. There was still more evidence to present. And the most damning piece, the one that would make the entire courtroom gasp, was still waiting in my lawyer's folder. Lorraine didn't know it yet, but the story she had spent years crafting about being my selfless savior was about to crumble completely. After that second hearing, something shifted permanently. It wasn't just that we had more evidence on our side. It was that I'd finally seen the fear flicker across Lorraine's face. That expression, that momentary crack in her confidence, replayed in my mind every night as I lay awake on Mason's couch. For the first time in my life, she wasn't untouchable. My lawyer, Miss Patel, called me the next day with a tone that was almost cheerful. "Caleb, I think we've got her, but I want to make sure we drive this point home so thoroughly that there's no wiggle room left. If we do this right, we can stop her from ever trying something like this again." She asked me to keep digging, not just into financial records, but into anything that could establish a pattern. Judges respond very strongly when they see a long-term history of manipulation or exploitation, she explained. If we can show that her goal was never just to be reimbursed, but to keep you financially dependent so she could control you, the case becomes much stronger. That became my mission. After work each night, I pored through every scrap of paper, every text message I'd saved, every memory that might have left a paper trail. And that's when I struck gold. While searching through a box of my old school papers, I found a copy of a letter from the Social Security office addressed to Lorraine. One I must have shoved into a folder years ago and forgotten about. This one wasn't like the others. It was a notice from when I turned 16, informing Lorraine that my benefits had been increased due to a cost of living adjustment. At the bottom of the letter, in neat, printed text, was a line that made my jaw drop. "This benefit is intended for the care and support of Caleb Harris and must be used for his food, clothing, shelter, medical care, and personal needs. Misuse of these funds may be subject to legal investigation." It wasn't just a letter. It was a smoking gun. She couldn't claim that the money was hers as compensation anymore. This letter made it clear that the funds were legally designated for me. When I showed it to Miss Patel, she practically lit up. "This is exactly what we needed. We can use this to argue that not only has she already been compensated, but if we can prove she used a substantial amount of those funds for non-essential, non-Caleb-related expenses, she may have technically misused federal money." That single phrase, "misused federal money," sent a chill through me. For so long, Lorraine had been the one wielding the threat of court and authority over me. Now, for the first time, I realized we had something that could put her on the defensive in a very real way. But Miss Patel wasn't done. She asked me to create a timeline, major purchases Lorraine made, vacations she took, big-ticket items she bought, and line them up next to the dates of my school trip denials, canceled birthday parties, and the time she claimed she couldn't afford basic expenses for me. The result was devastating. One page showed her taking a trip to Miami the exact same month I was told I couldn't go to homecoming because money was too tight. Another showed her buying season tickets for the basketball team right after she denied me a $40 school yearbook. The more I laid it out, the more I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about control. She had spent years keeping me just needy enough that I would never leave. Then tried to flip the script and make me the villain when I finally pushed back. And as if fate wanted to help me, another break came out of nowhere. A neighbor from our old street, a kind older man named Mr. Jensen, reached out to me after hearing through the grapevine what was happening. He said, "I always wondered where all that benefit money was going. I used to see her buying new furniture every other year, throwing parties, but you were mowing lawns to pay for your own baseball cleats." He offered to provide a written statement, and my lawyer nearly jumped out of her chair when I told her. Witness testimony that contradicts her narrative? Perfect. It shows this wasn't a one-off misunderstanding. This was a pattern everyone around her could see. Piece by piece, I was building a case that was no longer just defensive. It was offensive, airtight, and damning. And the more evidence I gathered, the more confident I became. Lorraine must have sensed it, because her texts changed again. She went from threats to bargaining. "Let's settle this outside of court. You drop your counterclaim, I'll drop mine. You don't want this to drag on for months, do you? I'm willing to forgive your attitude if we just move on." Forgive my attitude. That one made me laugh out loud. I didn't respond to any of them. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because silence was more powerful now. Every unanswered message was a reminder that I was no longer under her thumb. Meanwhile, I started to get my life back on track. I registered for my first semester of classes at the state university. I signed up for a student account and applied for a small grant to help with books. For the first time, my future felt like it belonged to me. But I wasn't just preparing for my future. I was preparing for hers. The final piece of the puzzle came when Ms. Patel discovered that Lorraine had listed me as a dependent on her taxes for multiple years. Years when she was also collecting survivors' benefits and claiming hardship assistance from a local church fund. It wasn't technically illegal, but it looked bad. Really bad. Judges hate double-dipping, Ms. Patel explained. This shows she wasn't just being compensated. She was profiting. By the time the final hearing date was set, we had everything lined up. The letters, the bank statements, the witness testimony, the tax returns, and that crucial Social Security notice that spelled out exactly how those funds were supposed to be used. Walking into the courthouse that morning, I felt calm, powerful, even. Not because I wanted revenge just for the sake of it, but because I knew the truth was finally about to be heard in full, unfiltered, undeniable. Lorraine was already there, pacing in the hallway. When she saw me, she stopped dead in her tracks. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then she said quietly, "You really think you're going to win?" I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just looked her in the eye and said, "I don't think it. I know it." What Lorraine didn't know was that Miss Patel had saved the most explosive evidence, the letter about misuse of funds, for last. She was planning to present it only after Lorraine testified under oath that she had spent every penny on my care. It was going to be a brutal checkmate. And as I sat down at the table, hands folded, heart steady, I realized I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was about to rewrite the narrative of my entire childhood in front of everyone. And once the judge heard what we had, there would be no going back. The courtroom was quieter than usual that morning, like everyone could feel that this was the day everything would come to a head. I sat next to Ms. Patel, hands steady on the table, my folder perfectly organized and ready. Lorraine sat across from us, tapping her pen nervously against the edge of her file. For once, she didn't look smug. She looked rattled. The judge called the session to order, and Lorraine was asked to take the stand first. She walked stiffly to the front, clutching her papers like a life raft. Her testimony started the same way it had before, talking about how she sacrificed everything to raise me, how she'd been left with no support, how she simply wanted to be reimbursed for the years of hardship. But this time, my lawyer didn't let anything slide. "Miss Bennett," Miss Patel said when it was her turn to cross-examine, her voice smooth but sharp. "You've testified that you spent every dollar you received on Caleb's care, correct?" "Yes," Lorraine said quickly, her chin lifting. "Every penny." "Every penny?" Miss Patel repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," Lorraine said again, this time a little more forcefully. Miss Patel nodded as if satisfied, then calmly reached into her folder and pulled out the letter, the one with the line about misuse of funds. "Your Honor, we'd like to submit Exhibit G," she said, handing it to the clerk. "This is a letter from the Social Security Administration, addressed to Ms. Bennett, clearly stating that these funds were to be used exclusively for Caleb's care and needs." The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the document. "I see," he said slowly. "Miss Bennett, you were aware of this condition?" Lorraine shifted in her seat. "Yes, but thank you," Miss Patel said, cutting her off gently. "We'd also like to submit Exhibits H through L, which are bank statements showing several large purchases, including a $3,200 vacation package, season tickets for the local basketball team, and a down payment on a new SUV. All during periods where Ms. Bennett claims she was struggling to provide for Caleb's basic needs." The clerk brought the papers to the judge, who flipped through them one by one. The silence in the courtroom was so thick you could hear the pages turn. "Ms. Bennett," the judge said finally, his tone now much cooler. "Would you like to explain these expenditures?" Lorraine's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Those were personal expenses," she stammered. They have everything to do with this case," Ms. Patel said calmly. Because you just testified under oath that every penny was spent on Caleb. Yet here we have clear documentation that a significant portion of those funds was spent elsewhere. The judge's expression hardened. Miss Bennett, I will remind you that you are under oath. Perjury is a serious offense. Lorraine's face went pale. For the first time, she looked small, like all the wind had been knocked out of her. But Miss Patel wasn't finished. Finally, Your Honor, she said, pulling out one last document. We have a statement from a neighbor who witnessed Miss Bennett hosting large gatherings, purchasing new furniture, and making expensive home upgrades during the same period she claimed to be financially burdened by Caleb's care. This is Exhibit M. As the judge read, I sat perfectly still, my heart pounding, but my face calm. This was the moment I had imagined 100 times. The moment where the truth was laid out so clearly that even Lorraine couldn't talk her way out of it. When the judge finally looked up, there was no mistaking the change in the room. The sympathy that some people had for Lorraine at the first hearing had evaporated. Now, everyone was looking at her with a mix of shock and disapproval. Miss Bennett, the judge said gravely, based on the evidence presented, it appears that your claim for reimbursement is not only unfounded but misleading. The court will be considering whether sanctions are appropriate. Lorraine's hands shook as she tried to gather her papers. But I raised him. Raising a child does not entitle you to profit from their survivor's benefits, the judge interrupted, his tone sharp. These funds were meant for Caleb's care. If anything, the evidence suggests you owe him an accounting of how they were used. I couldn't help it. I looked right at Lorraine then, not with anger, not with triumph, just calm. The same kind of calm she used to have when she told me no and walked away, leaving me powerless. Except now the roles were reversed. Miss Patel sat back, satisfied, letting the silence do the work. And that silence was deafening. The judge dismissed Lorraine's claim entirely and set a date to review the financial records in detail, hinting that restitution might be ordered. Restitution? The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. As we stood to leave, Lorraine didn't look at me. She just stared down at the table, her face blotchy, her hands clenched. For years, she had controlled the story. Made everyone believe she was the hero, the savior, the selfless guardian. And now, in one morning, it had all unraveled. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not just from her house, but from the invisible weight I'd been carrying since I was 5 years old. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. Because while the judge had dismissed her claim, there was still the matter of the accounting. Still the matter of showing just how much of that $200,000 had gone to things that had nothing to do with me. And once those numbers came out, Lorraine's carefully constructed reputation wouldn't just be cracked, it would be shattered. 2 weeks later, I walked back into the courthouse for what would be the last time. This time, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even angry. I felt steady, grounded. The kind of calm that comes after a long storm, when the clouds finally break and you can see sunlight again. Lorraine was already there, sitting at the petitioner's table. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. No flashy jewelry, no perfectly styled hair, no righteous posture, just a plain black blazer and a face that seemed 10 years older than it had been a month ago. She didn't look at me when I walked in. Miss Patel gave me a nod as we sat down. We have everything we need, she whispered. Today we close this chapter. When the judge entered, the room went silent. He had the thick stack of financial records in front of him, months of bank statements, tax filings, social security notices, and witness statements. After reviewing the evidence, he began, his voice even but firm. The court finds that Ms. Bennett's claim for reimbursement is entirely without merit. Furthermore, the court is concerned by the significant misuse of funds meant for the benefit of Mr. Harris. Lorraine shifted in her seat, her hands tightening on the edge of the table. The judge continued, records indicate that less than half of the funds received on behalf of Mr. Harris were spent on expenses reasonably related to his care. The remainder appears to have been used for discretionary purchases unrelated to his support. The court will be referring this matter to the appropriate agency for further review. I felt a weight lift from my chest that I hadn't even realized was still there. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about finally having someone in authority say, "You were right. You were telling the truth." The judge wasn't finished. "Miss Bennett, you are hereby ordered to provide a full accounting of all funds received and spent during the guardianship period. Failure to comply may result in legal action. Additionally, this court strongly recommends that restitution be considered for the amounts misused." Restitution. There it was again. Only now it wasn't theoretical. It was official. Lorraine finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Your Honor, please. I never meant to hurt him. I was doing my best." The judge's expression didn't soften. "Your best does not include misrepresenting financial records to this court or using funds for personal gain. This hearing is concluded." And just like that, the gavel came down. Lorraine stayed seated for a moment, staring at the table like she couldn't quite process what had happened. When she finally stood, she glanced at me, not with anger, but with something closer to defeat. Then she turned and walked out without saying a word. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. Outside the courthouse, my grandmother was waiting. She gave me a long, tight hug and said softly, "Your mom would be so proud of you right now." For a second, I had to swallow hard just to keep it together. That was all I had ever wanted, to know that standing up for myself didn't make me a bad son or a bad nephew or ungrateful. It just made me someone who refused to be controlled anymore. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was exactly what I had expected and more. Word spread through the family quickly. Some relatives who had sided with Lorraine called me to apologize. Others stayed quiet, embarrassed they had believed her lies. The official accounting Lorraine was forced to submit only made things worse for her. Page after page showed luxury purchases, cash withdrawals, expensive gifts for people who weren't me. When the agency finished their review, they ordered her to repay a significant portion of the funds. I don't know how she managed it. Maybe she had to sell the house, but she paid. For me, life didn't suddenly turn into some perfect movie ending, but it did get a lot quieter. The constant guilt, the accusations, the manipulation, gone. I signed my lease on a tiny one-bedroom apartment near campus, picked up extra shifts at the hardware store, and started saving for a used car. And when the first day of classes rolled around, I sat in the back of a lecture hall with my notebook open, a grin I couldn't quite hide on my face. For the first time in my life, I wasn't weighed down by the past. One night, a few months later, I drove past Lorraine's old house. The for sale sign was gone, the windows dark. It didn't feel like home anymore, but that was okay, because I finally had a life that was mine. As I sat there in the car, I thought about all the nights I had spent on Mason's couch wondering if I'd made a mistake, wondering if I should just give in. And then I thought about the moment the judge said the words, "without merit," and the look on Lorraine's face when the gavel came down. That memory made me smile, not out of spite, but out of relief. Because I had finally learned that the most powerful thing you can do isn't screaming or fighting back with anger. It's standing your ground, presenting the truth, and letting the truth do what it does best. I rolled down the window, took one last look at the house that had been both my prison and my proving ground, and whispered to myself, "We're done here." Then I drove away, and for the first time, I didn't look back. What would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever had to fight someone you trusted for the truth? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts.